Hey everyone, and welcome to the deep dive. We're going to be talking all about cool air, cool tools, and cool careers.
Sounds refreshing.
Yeah, we're diving into the EPA 608 certification today.
Nice.
So if you're into HVACR or just curious about how we keep things chill, while protecting the planet, this deep dive is for you.
Definitely. We're going to break down why this certification is so important for anyone working with refrigerants.
Absolutely. And to guide us, we've got this awesome resource, a YouTube video from Johnstone Solutions.
Okay.
It's called EPA Test Preparation Guide 1 of 5,
Right.
and it's a fantastic overview of what the EPA 608 exam covers and why it even matters.
That's great. So we'll distill the key takeaways from the video and answer some big questions.
Sounds good.
Like, what's EPA Section 608 of the Clean Air Act all about?
Okay.
Why should you care?
Yeah,
And are there any surprising facts that we can dig up along the way?
I love surprises.
Me too.
So EPA Section 608, what's the deal? It sounds pretty official.
It is. Basically, it's all about handling refrigerants responsibly.
Okay.
Think of it as the rule book for protecting the ozone layer
Okay.
and preventing refrigerants from contributing to, that whole global warming thing.
Right, the ozone layer, that's the Earth's sunscreen, right?
Yep.
Protecting us from those harmful UV rays. I remember hearing about the ozone hole way back in the day. Pretty scary stuff.
Absolutely. And you know what's fascinating
What?
is how scientists actually connected the dots between refrigerant leaks here on Earth and that giant hole in the ozone layer. They tracked the increase of certain chemicals, specifically chlorine, all the way up into the stratosphere.
Wait, hold on. They could actually trace those refrigerants up into the atmosphere. That's wild. How did they even do that?
Pretty incredible. They discovered that a single chlorine atom from certain refrigerants like the old R12 can destroy thousands of ozone molecules.
Wow.
It's like a chain reaction, just weakening our planet's natural shield.
Wow, talk about a domino effect. So those old refrigerants, the CFCs, were the main culprits?
Exactly. CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons.
Yeah.
Public enemy number one. Right. They contained chlorine, fluorine, and carbon.
Uh-huh.
And while fluorine is a potent heat-trapping gas, it was the chlorine that wreaked havoc on the ozone layer.
Okay.
That's why CFCs were eventually phased out.
Okay, so CFCs out, but that meant we needed alternatives, right?
You got it. That's where HCFCs and HFCs came in.
Okay.
HCFCs, or hydrochlorofluorocarbons, were a step in the right direction.
Okay.
They still had chlorine, but they broke down faster in the atmosphere thanks to the addition of hydrogen.
Okay, so HCFCs were like a temporary fix,
Yeah.
lesser of two evils. But what about HFCs? Where do they fit in?
HFCs, or hydrofluorocarbons, were a major improvement.
Okay.
No chlorine. They contain hydrogen, fluorine, and carbon.
Okay.
That made them ozone-friendly, which was a huge win.
Okay, so problem solved, right? No more ozone depletion. Everyone celebrates.
Well, not so fast.
Uh-huh.
Here's where things get really interesting and maybe a bit tricky.
Okay.
HFCs might be good for the ozone layer, but they contribute to another problem,
Uh-oh.
global warming.
So we traded one environmental challenge for another. It's like playing whack-a-mole with these refrigerants.
That's a great way to put it. But don't worry, the story doesn't end there. Scientists and engineers are constantly working on new solutions.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's next in the refrigerant saga?
Enter the HFOs.
Okay.
HFOs, or hydrofluorphins, are the new kids on the block. They're similar to HFCs, but contain at least one double bond in their chemical structure.
Gotcha.
This allows them to break down much faster in the atmosphere, reducing their global warming impact.
So HFOs are like the superheroes of refrigerants, saving the ozone layer and fighting global warming. But are they perfect? Are there any trade-offs?
They're definitely a step in the right direction, but there are always challenges.
Okay.
One thing about HFOs, and even some HFCs, is that they can be mildly flammable.
Wait, flammable refrigerants. That seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? We're talking about keeping things cool. If you're working with these refrigerants, it sounds like something you really need to know.
Absolutely. And that's where the EPA 608 certification comes in. It's not just a piece of paper. It's a technician's guide to understanding these nuances and working with refrigerants responsibly.
Okay, so the EPA 608 is like a safety manual, a knowledge toolkit for technicians. And speaking of knowledge, our source material mentions something called temperature glide when it comes to certain refrigerants. What's that all about?
Temperature glide. This is where things get a bit technical.
Okay.
But it's important to understand. Imagine you're baking a cake, and instead of all the ingredients baking evenly, some parts cook faster than others.
Okay.
Your cake wouldn't turn out so well, right?
Definitely not. A lopsided cake is a sad cake. So how does this relate to refrigerants?
Well, some refrigerants are actually blends of different components, each with its own boiling point.
Okay,
Think of those components like the ingredients in your cake recipe.
gotcha.
Now, if there's a leak in a system using a blended refrigerant, one component might leak out faster than the other, changing the composition of the refrigerant.
Okay, so it's like losing too much of one ingredient in your cake batter. It throws off the whole recipe.
Exactly. This uneven leakage or temperature glide can impact system performance, full pressure controls, and even damage equipment. It's like your system is working with a wonky recipe and the results are unpredictable.
So technicians really need to understand this concept of temperature glide, especially when they're troubleshooting system issues. It's not just about fixing a leak, it's about making sure the refrigerant blend is correct.
You got it. Now, while we're on the topic of keeping things running smoothly, let's talk about recovering refrigerants. This is a big part of the EPA 608,
Yeah.
and there are actually two main types of recovery systems.
Okay, I'm all ears. Fill me in on these recovery systems. What are we talking about here?
We have self-contained recovery devices, which are like portable vacuum cleaners for refrigerants. They're independent units that remove refrigerant from a system without needing any help from the system's components. Then there are system-dependent recovery units, which rely on the system's compressor or refrigerant pressure to help with the recovery process. Think of these like central vacuum systems. They need the existing infrastructure to work.
So self-contained is like a grab-and-go solution, while system-dependent is more integrated with the existing setup. Got it. But why do technicians need to know about both types?
Great question. It all comes down to the type of equipment you're working on. For example, smaller appliances like refrigerators might not have traditional service valves, so you'd need to use a system-dependent recovery method.
That makes sense. It's like using different tools for different jobs. You wouldn't use a sledgehammer to hang a picture, right?
Exactly. And this highlights just how important the EPA 608 certification is. It ensures technicians have the knowledge and skills to handle a wide range of situations.
It's clear that even seemingly simple appliances like refrigerators require specialized knowledge and tools. And I bet there are a lot of regulations surrounding all of this.
You're absolutely right. The EPA takes these regulations very seriously and for good reason.
Okay.
We're talking about protecting our environment and public health. Violating the Clean Air Act can result in hefty fines over $4,000 per day per violation.
Wow, that's a serious penalty. So the stakes are pretty high when it comes to handling refrigerants correctly. It's not just about protecting the environment, it's also about protecting yourself and your business.
Exactly. And speaking of protecting yourself, there's another important aspect to consider. Refrigerant compatibility. You can't just mix and match refrigerants.
Okay, so no refrigerant cocktails. What happens if you mix the wrong refrigerants?
It could be a recipe for disaster. For example, topping off an R22 system, which uses an older type of refrigerant with R410A, a newer refrigerant can damage the equipment, void warranties, and even pose safety risks.
So it's like putting diesel fuel in a gasoline engine. It just won't end well. Knowing which refrigerants can and cannot be used together is crucial.
Absolutely. And that's just one example of why understanding refrigerant compatibility is so important. It's all about using the right refrigerant for the right system.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've learned about the history of refrigerants, the challenges of protecting the ozone layer and combating global warming, and the importance of understanding temperature glide and refrigerant compatibility.
We've also seen how the EPA 608 certification equips technicians with the knowledge and skills to navigate this complex world of refrigerants.
Exactly. And now that we've laid the foundation, are you ready to delve even deeper into the EPA 608 certification?
Absolutely. In part 2, we'll explore the history behind these regulations and discover how global cooperation led to real change in how we deal with refrigerants.
Stay tuned, folks. It's about to get even more interesting. Welcome back to the deep dive. In part 1, we covered some serious ground from the ozone hole to flammable refrigerants and those tricky temperature glides. It's a wild world out there.
It is, and it's amazing how much science innovation and, believe it or not, global cooperation goes into keeping our planet cool and our air clean.
Speaking of global cooperation, you mentioned in the last part that we were going to learn about the history behind these refrigerant regulations. I'm all ears. What can you tell me?
Well, it's a pretty fascinating story. You see, back in the 1980s, scientists discovered that the ozone layer, our planet's natural sunscreen, was thinning at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
They traced it back to those ozone-depleting substances we talked about, specifically CFCs.
Right, the CFCs, those are the bad boys of refrigerants wreaking havoc on the ozone layer. So what happened next?
Well, the world took notice. In 1987, countries from all over the globe came together and signed a landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol.
Yep.
This treaty aimed to phase out the production and use of ozone-depleting substances, including CFCs.
So it wasn't just one country taking action, it was a global effort to address this environmental crisis. That's pretty inspiring.
It really is. The Montreal Protocol is considered one of the most successful international environmental agreements in history.
Wow.
It's a testament to what can be accomplished when nations work together toward a common goal.
And the impact has been significant, right? I mean,
Really
the
big.
ozone layer is actually showing signs of recovery.
Exactly. The Montreal Protocol really did make a difference. It proves that we can change course and protect our planet when we work together.
That's awesome.
But of course, the story doesn't end there.
Oh, I know. We shifted our focus to global warming, and that's where the EPA and Section 608 of the Clean Air Act came in, right?
Right. Again, Section 608 built upon the principles of the Montreal Protocol, specifically focusing on the HVACR industry in the U.S.
Okay.
It sets strict guidelines for handling, recovering, recycling, and disposing of refrigerants in a way that minimizes environmental impact.
Okay, so it's all about making sure these powerful chemicals are handled responsibly throughout their entire life cycle. No more releasing them into the atmosphere. And this brings us back to the EPA 608 certification, which ensures that technicians are equipped to handle all of this safely and correctly.
Exactly. It's a comprehensive exam that covers a wide range of topics, from refrigerant types and properties to safety classifications and recovery techniques. It even covers the legal requirements surrounding refrigerant handling.
Wow, it sounds pretty intense. It seems like a lot to know, but it makes sense. You don't want just anyone messing around with these refrigerants.
Exactly. The EPA 608 certification is about much more than just passing an exam. It's about demonstrating a commitment to environmental stewardship and professional excellence. It's about being a responsible technician who cares about the planet and the impact of their work.
Okay, I'm getting the picture. The EPA 608 is like a badge of honor. It shows that you know your stuff and you're serious about doing things the right way. So let's talk about the different types of EPA 608 certifications. I know you mentioned them briefly before, but can you give me a little more detail? What are the different levels, so to speak?
Absolutely. There are four main types of EPA 608 certifications: Type I, Type 2, Type 3, and Universal.
Okay.
Each one focuses on different aspects of refrigerant handling and applies to different types of equipment.
Okay, so type I, type 2, type 3, and universal. Let's break them down one by one. What's the deal with type I?
Type I certification is specifically for technicians who work on smaller appliances, things like household refrigerators, window AC units, and other systems, with a refrigerant charge of 5 pounds or less. If you're fixing a leaky fridge, you'd need this certification.
Okay, so type I, the small appliance specialist. What about type 2? What does that cover?
Type 2 certification is for technicians who work on high-pressure systems, which are commonly found in residential and commercial air conditioning and refrigeration. We're talking about things like split systems, heat pumps, and larger refrigeration units, the systems you'd find in homes and businesses.
Got it. So if you're dealing with the systems that keep our homes and workplaces comfortable, you need a type 2 certification. That sounds like a pretty common one for HVACR technicians.
You're absolutely right. It's one of the most common certifications out there. Now, Type 3 is a bit more specialized. It's for technicians working on low-pressure systems, which are typically found in large industrial settings or commercial refrigeration applications.
Okay, so we're talking about big chillers, cold storage facilities, industrial scale refrigeration, that kind of thing, not your average residential AC unit.
Exactly. Type 3 technicians need specialized knowledge and skills to work with the unique refrigerants and systems found in those environments.
Got it. So type I small appliances, type 2 residential and commercial, type 3 large scale industrial. What about universal? That sounds pretty impressive.
Universal certification is the ultimate badge of honor in the refrigerant world. It covers all three types: Type I, Type 2, and Type 3. If you hold the universal certification, you're basically a refrigerant superhero. You can handle any type of system.
Wow, a true master of the trade. So a universal certification means you've demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of refrigerant handling and regulations across the board. That's impressive.
It definitely is. Now, before we move on to the exam itself, let's talk a bit more about the process of getting certified. How does someone actually go about obtaining one of these certifications?
Okay, so you've decided you want to become a certified refrigerant handler. What are the next steps?
Well, it involves taking an exam administered by an EPA-approved organization.
Okay.
One of the most well-known organizations is ESCO. The same folks who created the training video we're using as our guide for this deep dive.
Right, ESCO. They seem to be the go-to source for EPA 608 training and certification. Our source material mentioned that the exam itself is pretty comprehensive. Can you give us a preview of what technicians can expect? What kind of topics are covered?
Absolutely. The EPA 608 exam is designed to test a technician's knowledge across a broad range of topics related to refrigerant handling. It covers things like the different types of refrigerants, their properties, and how to identify them.
Okay, so you need to know your refrigerants inside and out.
Exactly. It also covers the equipment used for recovering, recycling, and charging refrigerants. Technicians need to know how to use these tools safely and effectively.
So it's not just about theoretical knowledge, it's about practical skills as well. You need to know how to work with the tools of the trade.
Right. The exam also covers safety procedures, how to handle refrigerants safely to protect yourself and the environment. There are also questions about the legal requirements surrounding refrigerant handling, like the Clean Air Act regulations we talked about earlier.
So it's a mix of science, technology, safety, and regulations, a true test of a technician's knowledge and skills.
Exactly. And remember, the EPA 608 exam is closed book, so you can't bring any notes or study materials with you.
Oh,
You have to know your stuff.
yikes. That definitely adds to the pressure. So let's talk about some strategies for success. What are some tips for technicians preparing for the exam? How can they make sure they're ready for the big day?
One of the most important things is to start with a solid foundation. Make sure you have a good understanding of the basic concepts before diving into the more complex material. The Johnstone Solutions video we're using is a great place to start.
Right. That video provides a fantastic overview of the key topics covered in the exam. It's like a roadmap for success.
Exactly. And once you have that foundation, it's important to choose the right study materials. There are textbooks, online courses, practice exams. Find resources that align with your learning style and cover the specific topics you need to know.
So figure out what works best for you. Some people might prefer traditional textbooks, while others might thrive with online learning.
Absolutely. And don't try to cram everything in at once. Break down the material into manageable chunks and focus on mastering one section at a time.
So pace yourself, don't get overwhelmed, and make sure you truly understand each concept before moving on. It's about quality over quantity.
Right. And don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're struggling with a particular topic, reach out to an instructor, a mentor, or even other technicians who has already passed the exam.
There's a whole community of HVACR professionals out there who are willing to share their knowledge and support each other. Don't be shy about asking for guidance.
And last but not least, practice, practice, practice. Take as many practice exams as you can to familiarize yourself with the format of the questions and identify any areas where you need to focus your study efforts.
So it's all about getting comfortable with the exam format and building confidence. The more you practice, the better prepared you'll be.
Absolutely. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this part, from the global efforts to protect the ozone layer to the ins and outs of the EPA 608 certification process. But our deep dive isn't over yet.
That's right. In part 3, we'll delve even deeper into the exam itself, exploring those different certification types in more detail, discussing key topics, and offering some valuable test-taking strategies. Stay tuned, folks. It's about to get even more informative. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've journeyed through the history of refrigerant regulations, explored the importance of the EPA 608 certification, and even peeked behind the curtain at the exam itself.
We've covered a lot of ground, but now it's time to really roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty of the exam.
Okay, I'm ready to dive in. In the last part, you mentioned that there are 4 main types of EPA 608 certifications: Type I, Type 2, Type 3, and Universal. Let's break those down in a bit more detail, shall we?
Absolutely. Let's start with Type I, which, if you recall, is the certification for technicians who work on smaller appliances, things like household refrigerators, window AC units, and other systems with a refrigerant charge of 5 pounds or less.
Right. The small but mighty appliances that keep our homes and lives running smoothly. So what kind of knowledge do technicians need to demonstrate to earn this Type I certification?
Well, the Type I exam really focuses on the safe handling, recovery, and recycling of refrigerants in these smaller systems. Technicians need to understand the specific types of refrigerants commonly used in these appliances, the proper techniques for identifying leaks, and the correct procedures for evacuating and charging systems.
So it's all about making sure those refrigerants are handled responsibly and those appliances are serviced correctly. No refrigerant leaks allowed.
Exactly. Now let's move on to Type 2, the certification for technicians working on high-pressure systems, which are more common in residential and commercial settings.
Right. This is where we step up to those bigger systems, split systems, heat pumps, larger refrigeration units. These are the workhorses that keep our homes and businesses comfortable year-round.
Precisely. And because these systems typically have larger refrigerant charges and operate at higher pressures, the Type 2 exam covers a broader range of topics. You'll need to understand system components, refrigerant properties, safety procedures, and the proper use of recovery and recycling equipment.
So it's not just about knowing the refrigerants themselves, it's about understanding the entire system and how it all works together. It sounds like Type 2 certification requires a pretty deep level of knowledge and skill.
It definitely does. And that brings us to Type 3, the certification for technicians specializing in low-pressure systems. These are typically found in larger-scale industrial or commercial refrigeration applications. Think massive chillers, cold storage facilities, industrial freezers.
Right, the heavy hitters of the refrigeration world. It sounds like you need some serious expertise to work on those systems.
Absolutely. The Type 3 exam focuses on the unique characteristics of these systems, including the types of refrigerants, use the specific safety considerations, and the specialized recovery techniques required.
So it's a very specialized certification for technicians working in those specific industries, not something your average residential HVAC technician would need.
Exactly. And finally, we have the Universal Certification, which, as we discussed earlier, covers all three types: Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3.
Ah, yes, universal certification, the gold standard, the refrigerant master.
Precisely. Technicians who hold a universal certification have demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of refrigerant handling and regulations across a wide range of systems. They're truly well-rounded professionals who can tackle just about any refrigerant challenge that comes their way.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got our 4 types of certifications, each tailored to a specific area of expertise. Now, you mentioned earlier that there's also a core section of the EPA 608 exam that everyone has to pass, regardless of the type of certification they're seeking. Can you tell us a bit more about that core section? What does it cover?
Of course. The core section is like the foundation of the EPA 608 exam. It covers the fundamental knowledge that applies to all types of refrigerant handling, regardless of the specific system you're working on.
So it's like the basic training that every refrigerant technician needs to have under their belt. What kind of topics are we talking about here?
Well, it covers things like the Clean Air Act and its implications for the HVACR industry, the science behind ozone depletion and global warming, the different types of refrigerants and their properties, and the general safety procedures for handling refrigerants.
Okay, so it's all about laying the groundwork for responsible refrigerant handling. It's about making sure every technician understands the big picture, the environmental impact, and the importance of safety.
Exactly. It's about setting the stage for ethical and responsible practices across the entire industry.
Now, I'm sure preparing for the EPA 608 exam can feel a bit daunting for some technicians. What are some of the biggest challenges they might face?
One of the biggest challenges is definitely the sheer volume of information. The exam covers a wide range of topics, from scientific principles to technical procedures to legal requirements. It can be a lot to take in, especially if you're new to the field.
Right, it's not just about memorizing a few facts. It's about understanding complex concepts and knowing how to apply them in real-world situations.
Exactly. And another challenge is keeping up with the constantly evolving landscape of refrigerants and regulations. New refrigerants are being developed all the time, and regulations are always being updated to reflect the latest scientific understanding and environmental concerns.
It's a moving target. How can technicians stay on top of all these changes and make sure their knowledge is up to date?
That's where ongoing education and professional development come in. Organizations like ESCO and AHRI offer a wealth of resources to help technicians stay informed: training courses, webinars, publications. It's all about continuous learning, even after you've earned your certification.
So the journey doesn't end with the exam. It's about staying curious, staying engaged, and always striving to learn more. Now let's talk about some practical advice for those preparing for the EPA 608 exam. What are some tips for success? How can technicians set themselves up for a smooth and confident exam experience?
One of the most important things is to choose the right study materials. There are so many resources available, from textbooks to online courses to practice exams. The key is to find materials that align with your learning style and that cover the specific topics you need to know for your chosen certification type.
Right, it's about finding what works best for you. Some people might be visual learners while others might prefer a more hands-on approach. It's all about tailoring your study plan to your individual needs.
Exactly. And don't try to cram everything in at the last minute. Give yourself plenty of time to study and break down the material into manageable chunks. Focus on one section or topic at a time and really make sure you understand it before moving on to the next.
So pace yourself. Create a study schedule and avoid information overload. Quality over quantity when it comes to studying.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to reach out for help if you're struggling with a particular concept. Remember, there's a whole community of HVACR professionals out there who are happy to share their knowledge and support each other.
Right. It's about teamwork, collaboration, and helping each other succeed. Now, I know you mentioned practice exams earlier, but I think it's worth emphasizing again just how valuable those can be.
Absolutely. Taking practice exams is one of the best ways to prepare for the real thing. It familiarizes you with the format of the questions, helps you identify any knowledge gaps, and builds confidence for exam day.
So it's like a dress rehearsal for the main event. It helps you get those pre-exam jitters out of the way and walk into the testing center feeling calm and collected.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you'll feel.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about the EPA 608 certification. We've explored the history, the different types of certifications, the challenges technicians might face, and the keys to exam success.
We've even delved into the science behind refrigerants, the importance of environmental responsibility, and the legal requirements surrounding refrigerant handling.
And most importantly, we've highlighted the crucial role that technicians play in protecting our environment and ensuring the safe and responsible handling of refrigerants. It's a big responsibility, but it's one that you all carry with pride and expertise.
The EPA 608 certification is a symbol of that commitment, a testament to your knowledge, skills, and dedication to making a positive impact on the world.
So to all the aspiring and current HVACR technicians out there, embrace this journey of continuous learning. Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay committed to the vital work you do.
The future of our planet depends on it.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the EPA 608 certification. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay cool.